Welcome. In this course, we are looking at the System Security Certified Practitioner, also known as SSCP. This lecture is based off of the book System Security Certified Practitioner, the Official Study Guide, 2nd edition. ISBN 978-111-9542940. A lot of the graphics and content in these video lectures are all taken out of this book. I'm assuming that you have this book. These video lectures are just to kind of reinforce concepts discussed within this book. Lesson 1, the business case for decision assurance and information security. So there are no main objectives for this first lesson as it relates to the SSCP. So our first section is about information, and understanding that information is the lifeblood of the business. First of all, human beings are the first and foremost information processing animals, meaning we look at data. We try to have decision making based off of that data. It's known as data-driven decision making. For example, just basic communication between two individuals. We have unspoken rules that are already there for the exchange of information, such as language, rules, understanding, agreements, if there is errors in our speech, and a way to terminate it. And that's just basic communication between two parties. And the important part here is to understand that here we're looking at two entities, an individual communicating with another individual. The individuals don't really matter. If we're looking at one entity communicating with another entity, these same rules apply. And how they apply is normally we have a more broader understanding of data. And this data can be transformed into some form of information. Information can be processed in such a way so that it can be comprehended and it can be applied to and it can have some meaning. Data is typically raw without meaning. Information is data that has been refined and has meaning. That data becomes information. From information, we can draw conclusions. We can draw understandings. But we have to be careful what type of information we are collecting and analyzing. If, for example, the information we are collecting is PII, private identifiable information, then we may also have a need to protect that information. So it's not always information that is obscure. Sometimes it is information that is requiring protection. And there could be laws or regulations or ordinances protecting it. So we have to keep that in mind. So from our understanding of information, the more that we go through it, the more that we can start understanding and we can start generating knowledge from that information. Essentially, we see the broader general idea or the hypothesis. And these are probably true and correct based off of data that supports that information. One set of observations by itself might suggest there is more valuable minerals or oil or gas in a specific area, for example. So understanding maybe geography might be important. So it's not just looking at information by itself, it's combining different groups of information so that we can have better knowledge. So from our knowledge, we can build wisdom. Wisdom is the knowledge that enables us to become more powerful, broader, more general in our conclusions about certain things, such as future courses of action. So typically when we think of wisdom as drawing from knowledge of many different fields of activities or many different individuals that have come before us. This level of knowledge pyramid is also sometimes referred to as insight. So our insight is a way for us to be able to interpret raw data, turn that data into information, turn that information into knowledge, turn that knowledge into wisdom, and allow us to grow. So it's important to note that there is always room for interpretation as to whether collected information or facts or data are actually wisdom. Because in the lowest form, wisdom, and the most valuable is any level in between in that pyramid. So several things are important for us from the security standpoint from understanding this. First, there are three main points to look at, and that is understand that each step of processing adds value to the data or information we feed into it. That means it can be refined. The results should be more valuable to the organization, the business, or the individual than the input alone. So this value will result from the combination with other information and applying other types of logic and reasoning to help aid in the creation of new ideas. That's step one, or rule one. Alright, so the next point is that the value of any input and the results of processing them is directly proportional to the reliability. Bad data in is bad data out, or bad data in is bad information out. So if the data and the processing steps are not reliable, we can't count on the output. Third, from data to wisdom, this information can be either tactic, meaning inside people's head, or explicit, in some form that can be recorded, shared, and communicated. So that provides a basic understanding of how we look at data. So oftentimes we look at data with a single label. However, there's actually multiple layers of data. One, is data verifiable? Data should always be verifiable by making other observations. Is it repeatable? Can be observed multiple ways, and does it provide the same response? Is data able to be processed? And in this regard, data processing tends to refer to applying logic and reason to make sure that all of the observations conform to the acceptable quality and consistent standard. Sometimes this is called data cleaning. Basically, this is to remove any type of error or bias. We also have data validation. This is to compare it to a known acceptable source, also known as data smoothing. And data smoothing is also the ability to remove data samples that are too out of the range. So data validation likes things kind of pretty standard. If something is really abnormal, we kind of just strip it away. So that is the second point of data can be processed. The interesting part here is information can also be processed. Information process usually is the first step in a series of actions that we're applying to business logic. Basically, we take data to inform or enable the next step in the business process. Generating employee payroll, for example. We can look at the employee time card. That might require validating the employee's correct identifying the dates, the times, the hours, and whatnot for the appropriate time period. From there, we can actually build their pay. So, knowledge management is the activities in the business or the organization. Oftentimes, this is the real know-how of the organization, and this exists solely in the minds of the people who work there. This is the actual management functionality or the business processes that allow the business to function internally. And typically, again, this is only done by the workers that exist in that organization. One important thing that any SSCP individual or security practitioner really needs to understand is information is not necessarily information technology. The big distinguishing factors between information is one, you are protecting versus the technology you use to acquire, process, store, use, and dispose of that information. Information is data. Information technology is what we do with that data, and the technology that we employ or deploy to actually manipulate, store, process that data. So no one understands how that organization uses that data and information. This basically allows us to understand the different technologies that are there and allow us to properly secure and identify the information and what technologies use that information, and two, allow us to better secure that information and the information technology systems that are handling that information. So many different types of technologies are involved in information and in IT. However, typically IT is based off of information technology, digital computer technology, not systems, but anything that deals with and supports the information aspect or digital transformation. For example, if we're talking data manipulation, data gathering, that's all IT. If we're talking the AC to cool the equipment, AC is not part of IT. AC is typically part of facilities or maintenance. While granted, we would not really have the ability to do technology or technology support without AC. AC, again, is by itself a system outside of our technology-based supports. So there are some buzzwords we need to understand, like assurance and ensure and security and cybersecurity, information security and information assurance. So these are all big words that are part of security practitioners' vocabularies. Assurance essentially is taking the steps to increase confidence and success of an activity or a venture, often by managing or mitigating risks. Ensure is either writing of an insurance policy that's going to be used for transferring risk to the insurer, or another form of assure. Security are the steps to protect people, assets, or property from harm or loss. Cyber is a prefix that has originally in cybernetics, and essentially this is the study of control-based systems. Cybersecurity is taken by many to mean a few different things. First, it means the security of a digital network, web-based or network-based system. Or it could also mean the protecting and securing of military or national command, C3I systems. Information security is about being able to provide security to information and the processes, that's going to be including the people process, that use that information to make decisions. Last is our information assurance, and this is taking steps to provide confidence that the information you need to make decisions will be there when you need them. We do see a tendency for the different segments of the marketplace to use these terms also in different ways. So within business or academia or security professionals, they all may be slightly used in a different manner. However, they should all be very similar in their meanings. Alright, so let's move on to policies, procedures, processes, and how the business gets done. So basically, you need to understand from the security standpoint some basic ideas about the business. How is the business organized? What are the business governing principles? Are there any governance going on? For example, does the organization need to meet any compliance or governance requirements, whether it be industry, whether it be state, local government, or what? What are the activities the business does? And what is the business speak? And what I mean by that is, what is the language that the business is speaking? What's the purpose of the business? How does it function? So that's what it means by business speak. You have to understand that the purpose of IT as it relates to business is essentially to aid the business to do business. IT is not this magical thing where it's always first. IT's job is to align with the business so that the business can do better business. So the question is, who is the business? So from the legal business, sole proprietor, corporations, partnerships, these are three of the main types of business from the legal form. A sole proprietor is one specific owner, a sole individual. A partnership could be a small or medium business where there's a few owners. They're in a partnership. A corporation is typically where you have multiple owners that have an investment or a stock in the corporation, but the corporation leadership is actually appointed or elected. Not necessarily the owners, but they work on behalf of the organization. Also, the corporation is a fictitious entity. It's not living, it's not breathing, it's there. So from there, we need to understand the different types of stakeholders. So different stakeholders are anyone that is going to have a stake in the business. Investors, they put money into a business expecting a return. A stakeholder, a general stakeholder, is anyone that's going to have stake in that business. An employee is going to be a worker of that business. Customers are going to be customers of that business, and customers may have expectations of that business. Competitors. Competitors are also a type of stakeholder. Competitors rely on competition to drive those organizations forward, typically. So competitors are anyone that will compete against the business. And again, competition is a good thing that typically drives innovation. That ability to drive that innovation also typically leads to a better understanding and a better learning of how to do things in that realm. So from there, we have to understand a business plan. A business plan is a document that captures what the business owner wants to achieve and how they intend to do it. Typically, a business plan shows the planned activities over a given period of time, a 1-year, 5-year, 3-year plan. This will outline everything that the business is going to do. Also, this will outline a break-even point. Initially, when a business starts, there is going to be a cost. That means the business will be at a negative. The break-even point will be at what point will the business stop operating at a loss and start generating funds. So from the SSCP role, a business plan has very specific action items that you need to know about. So to deal with that, you need to understand that business plans typically mean it's a project basis. Essentially, if you're working on the business plan, estimating the cost of a given information security system, for example, versus potential impact of the business if it wasn't implemented. Those are things that an SSCP might do with the business plan. At a larger, more strategic level, the business plan will also set out the objectives and goals as well as the priorities for them. These priorities will drive the projects as well as provide the funding to other resources, which have to wait until resources are becoming available. Basically, prioritizing what projects go first. So from the security standpoint, the security practitioner will play a role in helping craft the priorities of the organization. For example, if the business plan is to roll out a website without worrying about protection, the SSCP that might be involved might point out a website that isn't protected may have consequences, and they may outline those consequences. So that is one of the key takeaways with understanding the role of the security practitioner in the business plan development. So as we're starting to get into the business understanding, we have to ensure that we have a good understanding of the alignment to the organization. So earlier we were talking about business security. We we need to look at a concept called CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we're going to have to relate this back to the core functions of the business alignment. So confidentiality protects for example, confidentiality protects new intellectual property that the team is creating for the company. Integrity is necessary for both directions. The company doesn't want any problems with new design, and it also wants to inadvertently flow back to the customer service or product service in troubleshooting tickets. So confidentiality is about being able to protect things. Integrity is about being able to verify the integrity of something and it wasn't modified without authorization. Lastly is availability. And availability is the access to a certain resource is available. And in a business relationship, we're talking about the requirement for business resources to be available. So if we're looking at designing a team, for example, have to run many simulations on a model exercise to substantiate the amount of computer time and memory for a certain product, for example. So now that we have at least a general kind of understanding of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, don't worry, that will not be the last time we talk about them. We will actually be using these three terms a lot greater in depth in later modules, and we're going to be diving into those concepts a lot deeper in later modules. I just wanted to bring them up now so we can see about our alignment. So, understanding the alignment. So when we look at any type of business process, we have to ensure that we are doing the business process that aligns to the business. And aligns to the business its purpose, its intent, its missions, its goals, its objectives. If the business purpose is to sell shoes, for example, then everything that business does, all of the actions a business does, should be in pursuit of selling shoes. That means they may not do things that involve socks or involve a different product because their purpose is to make shoes. Now granted, business objectives can shift. Maybe after working as a shoe store for X amount of years, they want to grow their product line, so they want to grow. That means their mission, their purpose can be adjusted. But if we are not assuming those adjustments, we have to align everything to the current mission, the current objectives. So we have to look at business logic and business processes, understanding how we take assets and information and we turn them into opportunity, wealth, and success. So the business process are the steps the business takes, and the actions alone allow them to function. So business logic is intellectual property, for example, and that is how the business is going to operate. So knowing how to get business done effectively, faster, and cheaper is typically called a competitive advantage. Business executives guard these business logics because they provide that competitive advantage that their competitors may not have. So these logic could be like trade secrets, and that's going to be anything part of the company's logic that believes that are unique and not widely known or understood. It could also be a patent, a technology control that only one organization has that others don't. And patents are legally recognized by the government that someone has created a new and unique way of doing something, and the patent itself will grant a legal monopoly right for that idea for a fixed length of time. Violation or copying of that patent without approval is patent infringement and is illegal. All of these things allow the business to have what's called a value chain. And the value chain is essentially just what pushes profits. A value chain will analyze or value chain analysis will provide ways to do an in-depth investigation end-to-end of the nature of what the business does. That includes things like suppliers, customers, how to generate money, how to generate funds, expenditures, supporting activities, and so forth. It answers questions like what input is needed, what output or outcomes are produced, what kind of standards or quality or effectiveness might be there, timelines. All of this exists so that we can gauge how the business generates profits. And this is a value chain diagram, and this is also known as a fault tree diagram or method. And essentially, what causes, what are the effects, and what problems could occur. So this is a value chain analysis called a Askewa diagram, typically called a fault tree or fishbone diagram. This is very generic, and essentially the major business process is the backbone of the fish, flowing from left to right. The head and tail are optional, of course. The diagonal sections come into the backbone, showing how key elements of the business logic are accomplished, outlining all key elements: labor, people, processes, materials, measurements, metrics, equipment, and so forth. These all kind of outline if there are problems. So all of this brings us to the three big do's. That's because the value chain will show us that each of the well-designed business processes, management ought to be able to measure or assess the steps to make sure that all of them are executing properly. If the step is not working correctly, how do we figure that out? This also brings us to the requirements that we will have to do. That means due care, due diligence, and due process. Due care is the responsibility to fully understand and accept a task or a set of requirements, and then ensure that you have fully designed and implemented all of the operating system and processes to fulfill those requirements. That means you fully have completed everything. Due diligence is the responsibility to ensure that the system and processes you implemented to fully fulfill a set of requirements are actually working correctly, completely, and effectively. If not, you're supposed to reassess and redevelop. Lastly is due process. And this means that there is a process that defines the right and correct way to do a particular task. That process specifies all of the correct steps. Every organization may be slightly different. How we go about figuring those steps out is typically done through interviews or analysis of the workers, but the process should actually have a defined step procedure. A, B, C, D should equal E. The due process is actually about fulfilling those steps and requirements. Due diligence is about ensuring that the system being designed is correct and complete and meets all of the requirements. Due care is about being able to accept the requirements and actually defining the requirements. So this leads us into a topic for compliance and regulation. One of the things that our chapter brought up was financial accounting standards. The generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, ethical accountability, legal accountability, both civil and criminal, and the concept of stewardship. In any organization, IT and security typically have to account for their spending. Typically, IT is one of the big areas where most money is spent, yet very little is produced. The goal of IT and security is to ensure the business is able to keep functioning. IT does not generate money. IT ensures that other portions of the organization can generate money. But that means things like Basic accounting is there. Ethical accountability is also there. More importantly, legal accountability is there. Understanding the criminal and civil ramifications of actions must be there. So the concept of stewardship, when we talk about the 3 do's, is actually also important. We can see that an ancient idea being expressed, that the idea of being a good steward, for example, a steward is a person who stands in the place of an absent owner or a ruler and acts in their absence, but operates in their best interest. A good steward seeks to preserve, protect the value of whatever they're standing in for example, a business. They ensure that they're entrusted with the care and responsibility to make actions that will actually benefit whatever they're standing in for. So if they are standing in for a business owner, for example, they're going to do everything in their power to grow the business. They have the freedom to take whatever actions they deem necessary to grow. One of the last major sections is about who runs the business. Well, typically, it's C-suite. C-suites actually control and operate the business. They do this on behalf of things like the owners and investors. The owners and investors may also have a board of directors. This is going to be a group of individuals that ensure that the business is being ran correctly. So even if you are a CEO, the CEO actually has a board of directors that can remove them. The board of directors, again, is making sure whoever is the steward in charge of the organization is doing what's in best interest of the organization. The C-suite actually has people, divisions, and VPs underneath them that report to them. Underneath the division and VPs are managers. Underneath managers are supervisors, and underneath supervisors are workers. On the pyramid, we have the largest base being the workers. That's the most amount of people. And then there are fewer people for supervisors, fewer people for managers, fewer people for VPs, and the fewest amount for C-suites. This builds our structure for the organization. So why work is completed? You'll see that we have an inverse triangle. Workers typically do the most amount of work. They accomplish value-creating tasks, while the supervisors provide guidance and coordination. Managers provide the plan, the equipment, and also help coordinate. VPs do the planning, the budgeting, and the allocation of both authority and resources. And again, the C-suite does support and delivery so that all those above them can, or technically all people below them within the organization, can actually do the task. Workers do the tasks, but management typically takes all of the risk. A worker that does something bad can only be fired. However, whatever the worker does rests solely on the management's team shoulders. So if a worker does something really bad, management is the one that has to deal with the situation.